earlier games, there's a notion of recruiting people. We called it giving them the magic Kool-Aid from time to time. We sometimes spin it as a religious moment, and we usually use music as the metaphor of you're going and maybe you're Elvis and you're going into their city and they like your rock and roll, so they come with you. And we echo that game in the cultural game of Civ as well. So it's important in the worship game for space that when I'm coming down and I'm trying to buy into my gospel and buy into me as the supreme being, that I reference back to the tribe game and the Civ game where you had similar kind of recruitment of those creatures. Trade also is referencing back to the earlier games in Tribe and a clear metaphor for space games. Missions, the challenge of missions, I think the goal of missions was to give players, I've heard a lot of times that when players, we've sat down in focus groups and early on when the game didn't tell them exactly what to do and the player who's sitting down to play says, what am I supposed to do? And if we give them the answer, anything you want, the world is your oyster, do whatever you want. There's a pretty healthy demographic of player that encumbers them. They get overwhelmed by their choices, and there's certain people that love that and love just going, okay, I'm going to try whatever I want. But there's another player that really likes to have some direction and some focus. The challenge with missions is that the space game is meant to be open-ended, so we couldn't script missions as you normally would, and we had to come up with a system to procedurally generate missions, like everything else in the game, that was pulling in modules to create the missions, try and make them feel unique every time you see them. And to do that, we were really having to play up the pollinated content, to have them go and look for pollinated content, to have them use the pollinated content and insert it into the mission and try and wrap as many different fictions in as possible. Badges are one of our key ways for that player who does feel lost if you just say whatever you want, do whatever you want. Badges were just a clear win of a reward system so that players that want to move.
Did you edit the slides?
Are you new slides? So this was an early proposal. There's a slide after this, Will. Back to the trailer.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, we have a huge game to build, and no one's going to give us all the time we want. I mean, to build this game, we could work on this game forever, and it was really important to try and figure out what's the 10% that gives us the most. What do we deliver on that is the biggest win?
Yeah, as you can see from that brief overview, there are just so many moving parts to what that space game could become. We have to ship it someday. It all has to be kind of polished, tested, etc. So it really is a matter of figuring out what is the best, fraction of that hangs together well. And, really, if you get like the best third or fourth of that, that's going to get you 80 or 70% of the gameplay. And that's true usually in most game designs I've kind of encountered. Now, so that's the space game, which is really the big open-ended epic part of Spore. But yet getting there, we actually go through these other previous phases. We basically have the evolution to tribal, building your city, and then your civilization. Now, each one of these, basically we kind of thought of as referencing some genre. Evolution was a little weird, but the Civ one was clearly Risk, Civilization, kind of a light Civ. City, kind of a very, very simple Sim City, tribal, roughly populous. And the Evolution was kind of this weird third-person eater thing. But Alex is going to talk a little bit now about kind of unifying those core levels.
Do you want to talk about City before I do that? Or?
No, I'll let you talk about City. But one of the things we also did is we storyboarded, what the player experience might be through these levels, which helped us think about, kind of what the player viewpoint is in all this.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges, I was reminded last night with a few drinks that we were challenging one of the core rules of game design, which is that you shouldn't mix genres. And I think Will saw that as a very specific challenge early on that he was going to prove wrong. But we're actually challenging something else on a deeper level, which gives us a lot of stress, and that is whether you can change the player's viewpoint of who they are in the world as you play. So in the creature game or the cell game, you're an avatar. You're actually a little creature driving around the world, interacting with objects in the world. And then as soon as you hit tribe, you start to pull back from your creature. And the aim here is actually to give you that feeling of the powers of 10, to say, here is a little cell and the camera is in really, really tight and it's essentially 2D. Then I'm in a sort of 3D world. Then I'm sort of looking down on my bunch of guys. Then I'm looking down on my planet. And then I'm in space and I'm flying around this vast universe. You know? So we're sort of pulling you back not only metaphorically in terms of the camera position and things like that, but also in terms of your behavior. So we're saying, no, you need to change the way you play. And this is really challenging because games usually succeed by saying once you learn something, you know, it sticks. You stick with this piece of information and it'll be useful for you throughout the rest of the game, and we're going to add more information to that. Whereas we're basically saying, yeah, 50% of what you learned sticks. The other 50%, you don't need to worry about that. You know, so communicating that is one of our really large remaining challenges. And some of these videos, these are some early videos we made of different elements. These are 3 videos about fight. This one's from Creature Games.
A lot of these were getting a sense of the kinesthetic. You know, if the player was controlling this creature, you know, what is the pacing of an interaction? How elaborate is the strategy? What's the feedback that you're getting?
Yeah, we're trying to get a lot of things, even sort of like here, like how do you get back into the game? Like just trying to look at the problem on different levels.
One question with that one was, what does it look like when a slug fights a biped creature?
Yeah.
How does a slug fight?
Yeah.
That's an ongoing question.
If you crawl out of the ooze at the start of the game, how do you know you're fighting and not just sort of slugging?
This is a prototype from the tribal game, kind of showing how the intelligence of the creatures might have advanced, and now they fight differently than they did in the creature game.
We also had a challenge in that we wanted to make sure that people knew that this game had violence, unlike every other Maxis game we've ever done.
There was a phase that Ocean went through where every single fight scene had, you know, Sam Peckinpah levels of blood spurting out, and we had to kind of dial Ocean back a bit.
You said Kill Bill Volume 2,
yeah,
as I
Kill
recall.
Bill. Yeah, Kill Bill was our aesthetic for a little while.
It seemed to have some people that are like this like repressed Maxis sort of like
you know,
repressed violence.
You do all these games about wholesome stuff.
Kissing and hugging.
Day after day.
That's time to kill things, you see.
Which is kind of a big open question for us, is like how much did we want this to appeal to like hardcore gamers versus Sims players? And we had a lot of discussions on the team, you know, aesthetically, and around the violence issue.
This bit's the bit right here. That disturbs people.
Not to be the token girl, but I was like, too much, too
Yeah.
far.
I think the only reason we didn't do it, though, was it was technically impossible. It would be awesome, you know what I mean? Like if you could eat your creature and actually pull the limbs off, and that's how you knew there was less food there.
Yeah, so we sort of dialed that back a
but you
bit.
can see also there's 2 layers to the communication that need to be unified for it to feel like a single whole as a game and not a sequence of, you know, individual games. And you're looking at a sequence of behaviors of combat, basically, of taking over cities or, you know, like conquering animals and all that sort of stuff, and trying to actually make them feel like part of the same game is...
And on the flip side, as we went to the Civ, we started exploring, you know, the other side, you know, how kind of humorous and cartoony did we want to get. This is an interaction between kind of a less aggressive culture and a more aggressive culture. You know, how would we convey this? What would the reaction space be?
I like how they drive a bus. This one's got the poke-mobile. Yeah?
And here's a different culture kind of attempting the same interaction. You know, a lot of this came down to, you know, where was the camera going to be? What sort of level of feedback?
I like to think that this is foreshadowing the worship game in space.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of the meta games you play at the lower levels, we wanted to basically continue on to the higher levels.
Yeah.
So this is basically kind of what our religious game is basically going down this path. We're going and religiously recruiting other members that stay in the cities. So basically, I think we're way over time here, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But I want to give you some sense of what it is like to explore a huge design space with a qualified team at all these different levels at once. But yet, at the end of the day, you have to pull it all together. You have to unify this process. You have to kind of make it a singular experience for the player, understandable. And you have to keep in mind that this is, you know, basically, it's got to be something the player wants to do and is easy to do. It's not work. They don't have to use this like a word processor.
Aim of Civ as well.
This is their disposable time that they're spending on this experience. And there is a trend now toward games being less complicated, you know, not these 40 or 50-hour investments, but something I could sit and, you know, spend 20, 30 minutes playing, you know, understand how to play within 5 minutes, get into, which is really almost at odds with the idea of this giant epic thing. But I think that there is a balance you can achieve, but it just involves a lot of exploration. And I want to thank my design team for showing up here today and flying in, and thank everybody here for attending.